Hi, this is A Path to Hollywood. My name is Tony, I'm film director and filmmaker. Today our guest is Helix. Her title is Specialty Custom. Helix, could you tell us what bring you into the movies?
Originally, wasn't thinking about movies. Like that just wasn't in my head. I don't know, maybe because of the distance, just wasn't in my mind. I originally wanted to go into engineering, but specifically I wanted to be an engineer for NASA. But that found out wouldn't make a good astronaut. So I was desperate. I was searching for what do I do with my career. I'm in college. And I was actually doing a lot of praying. And then God pointed out, go into film. It's like, that's weird. I don't know, but that's something that's over there. You know, it was so different, something I never considered. But the more I looked into it, the more I realized, like, actually, this might be a good fit for me. So I started cold calling people. I started calling anyone that from movies that I actually like. So, you know, like the suits from Tron. Love that graphic look with the bright lights, with the black suits, the sleek sci-fi, look was really interesting to me, but it's also some superheroes. I've always been a nerd. So, I grew up going to Comic-Con and conventions since, I was maybe 5. I had a little Spider-Man and Superman action figure since I was a kid. I didn't care about Barbies. I was like, superheroes, this is my jam. So, yeah, I've always liked that stuff, and I've been making my own costumes since I was 8. All these things I didn't realize, this is actually an interest of mine. This is something I've been doing. So, it started with making Halloween costumes, and maybe for Comic-Con, I might dress up as a superhero. But yeah, when I was looking at it, I didn't really know, my school wasn't meant for film. That wasn't what it was for. So I actually started taking classes in the engineering school for industrial design, and it was human-centered. So I think those were actually the classes that helped the most for training for this job, because we were looking at the human and how the human moves and how the human interacts. And so comfort, all those things, that human-centered focus was good for creating suits that people wear and move in. And they also had some little things they did have a 3D modeling program, but it was SolidWorks. It's mainly for engineers doing product stuff. That was kind of more the focus of that program. But SolidWorks was the first program I could do 3D modeling. So when I first started here, I actually used that program. And I still use it now, but since then I've learned quite a few others. Well, a lot of our projects we can't announce until it's been announced publicly. So we'll get everything ahead of time, and we have to be careful when we say it. The last one in theaters that we worked on, last thing in theaters, it was either Top Gun or Doctor Strange, that Madness one, the Universe of Madness. I forgot what that full title is, but we worked on those, WandaVision and a few other things. So yeah, we worked on Doctor Strange. TV show-wise, we worked on, I think WandaVision was one of the later ones. We did something for Book of Boba Fett. We did, different stuff, but we did also Spider-Man No Way Home. We did some stuff for that. Because my company has worked on other previous Spider-Man movies. So we redid some of the costumes or fixed and recreated some. I think Toby's was a shop before our shop existed. So we remade his looking at the old suit. But Andrew Garfield Spider-Man, we've worked on my company before. So we were able to remake those easily. And we've also done a lot of Tom Holland Spider-Man. So we did that. We did it in conjunction with another company, but we were part of it. So yeah, that was cool. I know. Got to work on some of those web shooters, so hey. So yeah, I mentioned before SolidWorks. I still use it. It's really good for things that are made out of metal. Machined, CNC, all that, laser cut, it's good. The machines read it well. So, maybe for accent pieces, maybe for some functional pieces, you need it to be stronger. You want it to, might do it out of aluminum, so it still has strength and lightweight qualities to it. But it's a lot of more of those technical parts of the costume. So for the things that are more organic in form, Like you might have like gauntlet armor, like maybe certain parts of a helmet or a chest, you might want to use something like Cinema. So that's the other program I use. And that one's also pretty good and pretty accurate. So you could do a lot of 3D printing from that and things should fit. Like they actually use units. For texturing and doing other, even more organic features on a costume, I will then use ZBrush. So that one's better. That one's a little tricky in some ways that you don't have actual units. They have like Z units, which don't really mean anything. So when using that program, I'll actually bring things to use as like a guide or a measurement. So it's like, oh yeah, I know this is going to be 1 millimeter thick because I brought in a separate object for that. So I end up using those 3 programs a lot for 3D modeling, but then I do use quite a bit of Photoshop and Illustrator for maybe if the fabric has a texture or creating the patterns for the texture itself, like the shapes, especially if there's many versions cut out or if it's cut out in leather or CNC'd again or laser cut, I may use those other 2 programs. No, actually, a lot of stuff I make gets 3D printed. And I've been trained to work, or I've learned how to use a lot of 3D printers to print. So we use a few different types of 3D printers. Some are more resin-based, so that you'll usually have like a light or a laser, something that cures the resin and it builds up by layers. The other stuff we use is like FDM. That's another process. So we use a few different processes of 3D printing depending on the strength of material. Are we going to use that part directly or are we going to mold it? So some things print more like accurately, sharper and nicer, but it doesn't have much strength. So you have to consider like what is it going to end up being if it's going to be used on directly, painted directly, or if you're going to cast it. So yeah, I've used 3D printers, laser cutters, all those things. I feel like a lot of people haven't, and not all 3D printers act the same way. So you kind of all of them have their own programs, and so you have to learn all that stuff, what works best for that printer, what process so it's a thing. It's a whole other thing. So that's kind of what I was mentioning. In school, the industrial design classes was kind of how I used to study for it, but not exactly, because I did use some of the SolidWorks things I learned and learning about human design and that focus, but I actually did a lot of YouTube. That was quite a bit of my learning. I did take one class, because that was for ZBrush. My company has this program where you could take some 3D modeling classes. So once I got in, I was taking those classes on the weekends, but when I would go home, I would just practice and watch YouTube videos for the one program, and eventually, there was at one point when I started, things got slow, and that's where I learned a third program, Cinema 4D, from a friend. So he gave me a couple quick tutorials of like how to use the program, and then from there, I just messed around on my own and learned as I was working. So my job was really nice for me because they actually let me enter in like in a trial phase. Because normally, that company in particular really likes experienced people. They're very much into perfection. So being a new person's not their normal go-to choice, but they saw potential in me, so they let me join in. So yeah, I would try to do my job, whatever the task was, and then I would go home and then practice for several hours and come back. So it was a lot of on my own training with a couple classes thrown in here and there. Since I moved to LA, I think I've worked on somewhere around 30 films and shows. So
You said 40 or
30, around 30, because I've been here for a little over 7 years, approaching 8, and it's included everything from Marvel, Avengers, all that stuff, DC stuff, Netflix, Hulu, Amazon. So I've been working with all the big projects. Yeah, so one of the projects I worked on for Marvel was Black Panther. That was one of my first ones. So that was exciting because it was one of the first ones. It was the first time I got to see someone put on a suit for a fitting and move around in it, which is a magical moment in a way that all of a sudden you see this thing you've been working on for weeks, months, a person puts it on and it comes to life. You know, they're kicking, they're punching, they're dodging, and all that. So that was very exciting. That was a very memorable moment. I worked on things like, Spider-Man's web shooter. I worked on Black Manta and all his like cool, very different designs. And so a lot of superhero stuff lately, but there are some sci-fi things for like Altered Carbon and things like that. Some fantasy armor you might get as well. Like anything of that, like that's more armor related, I've worked on. A lot of those pieces, things that have lights and all that. And also some muscle suits. So I've done those kinds of projects. What I do is I'll have the artwork from the costume designer. And some of the artwork is very detailed and some of it is very vague. You might just get a line, you know, and that's it. And you're like, that's the belt is one color black, but we throw our own spin on it. So I get to interpret the art that I received, and some of it is very clear, so it's not too hard to interpret, nor do I get to put too much of my own spin on it. But sometimes when it's very vague, unclear, sometimes the client just kind of has an idea, then you get to throw more of your creative spin. And then there's a process of back and forth of like getting approvals for what you decide or how you're interpreting it. And you also have fittings, but I sometimes will scan the actor or the stunt double, and then we bring in the model into the computer. We'll also mill the body so you have the full figure, and that's how you can kind of check fits during the process in between the actor and the stunt coming in. So I'll take that 3D model scan data that we have of the actor, and I will sculpt the suit on top of it to make sure it fits. And like the muscle suit especially, you want to make sure it's comfortable and it fits their form. So we get hired by the costume designer, my particular company. So we'll get the artwork. They already have kind of the vision, but sometimes we'll be the costume designer. So they'll contact our company. They'll say, this is the movie, this is the kind of character we're looking for. Maybe they'll send us inspiration photos so we can have a direction to head to. But a lot of times we have the artwork at least somewhat figured out, and then it hits my department first. So we take the artwork and we interpret it, we start building it. We then send all our parts off to be made, either machine, printed, all that stuff. Then another department takes that, cleans it up. So that's maybe the mold and body shop department. They'll clean it up, they'll maybe take molds if it's supposed to be a soft piece or if it needs to be in a certain material. And then from there, usually it'll go off to paint or the finisher. So if it needs hardware, if it needs electronics, lights and all that stuff, then another department starts taking care of that. They start putting things together that need it interlocked and all that. You also have the painter. The painter also paints. And then a separate department does all the sewing. So we have the soft goods department, so that if it needs to be cut out of leather or if they need to actually stitch the suit together, that's a whole separate department. So I'm in the very beginning doing all the sculpting. So that's my main function. So my department started with only 3 people. Now I think we're up to 5. And sometimes, depending if the project's really big and there's a lot of characters, we will hire other people to come in and out. So sometimes we'll grow up to maybe 6 or 7, but usually there's like a core group of about 3 to 4. But other companies have different numbers. It just depends on the size of your company, but there's usually at least a small handful for every shop that does this. So I think there's usually one person who's like the vision, the head. And then that person might describe it, what they're going for, the themes and all that, to someone who illustrates. So that's another second round. So you might have a few individuals for that. Then it hits us. So we have a small department, but then from there you might also have the body shoppers, which there's usually more of them than digital. So, but it depends on the movie, because there's some movies like Aquaman where there's tons of suits, tons of special suits. So in those instances, you'll actually hire multiple shops. So we worked on a lot of the main characters, just like a few of them. And we might do different versions of their suit depending on the story. But there was a whole other couple shops that did just the background characters. So yeah, sometimes it's hundreds, sometimes it's 30. You know, it depends on the project. So yeah, that varies depending on the project. Some projects we get just the main character, some we get one character, some we get 15 to 20. It really depends on the project, the budget. There are projects where we just get the helmets because they know our shop people will do really detailed professional work, so they might just say like our budget only has enough money for just the helmets because it's going to be in most of the shots. So we might get delegated those parts, but yeah, I think most projects you'll get a few. Maybe not all. We can't do all. We don't have the resources to do all the extras, so that's why we mainly work on like a few detailed important characters. So I think we're considered pre-production. We're still before everyone starts shooting. We make everything. We do occasionally send 1 or 2 people onto set to help with the costumes if there needs to be any repairs or if they need help assembling it or putting it on the actor, dressing the actor. We normally don't really work with post-production. Occasionally we'll give our 3D models to post-production to help them with any special effects or CGI. So they just take our information so they can make their stuff more accurate. But that's pretty much all our involvement there. Sometimes it's for toys too, like, you know, here's a model of the actor and his stuff. The request comes from the company that we're working for if we provide those extra data information points. We're more pre-production, so we are like one of the first groups of people to actually work on the film. So some of us will actually see the script, not all of us get to see it, but we're in that stage when they're still casting the actor. Sometimes they don't even have it fully cast, the crew, and we'll start working on a costume hoping that we'll find someone similar to the size we're building. So we're very early on in the filmmaking process. Yeah, so for some, like a couple of the members from the shop, usually more the finishing department, they'll get to go on set to help the celebrities with either dressing or the stunt doubles with dressing or taking off pieces, because some stuff is complicated to remove, so they might be there to help remove things, put it on, or if something gets too damaged. Like sometimes you'll get bad paint scratches during a stunt, so you might need someone there to do touch-up work and things like that. It happens. So usually there's multiple suits made because of stunt work and because of, you know, action scenes, things like that. You might have multiple copies, so you might have someone there to, okay, if this piece is screwed on here and attached in a certain way, during the filming process, you might have to replace it with the backup piece. So we'll have maybe extras of certain parts that we know might take on some damage during the filming. So that's where some of us have a little bit of involvement in the, I guess, the middle stage, the filming stage. And then, yeah, the only thing we do for the end post is just provide sometimes some digital artwork that we made or the 3D models so they can use it for reference.
How about you? Have you ever been?
No, I haven't been to set. I always wanted to be there, but usually I just get the next project. I'm starting the next thing while they're filming, so I'll be on a completely different thing during that time. So that's kind of how it works. I'm not a finisher. Those are the people who do all like the gluing, the special gluing, the maybe screw in parts and all that, like maybe occasional electrical work. So those are the people who usually end up on set if they do, because they might need to fix something that's physical there. No, we actually don't do any special effects. We just maybe provide the 3D models so someone else can do all that, but we just make things that you can hold at the end of the day. And special effects, they have a different way of working, so they don't really need it. Sometimes our models are too heavy for them, so they might have to change it, but no, we don't really do anything for post. My department in particular, we don't really have heads. We kind of share the work equally, although sometimes you can see your skill level based on what you receive. It's not always, but when I first started, a lot of things I did were maybe boots and greaves, so lower stuff. But once you reach a certain level, you'll probably do things that are mainly seen in the camera's view. So like waist up is very important thing. So like helmets, you know, chest, shoulder, greaves, gauntlets. Those things are more for the higher advanced sculptors because they're seen the most, and you probably get more close-up shots. But it doesn't mean you're not skilled if you work on boots and stuff, because every costume needs it. So sometimes you'll get that part, but it doesn't mean you don't necessarily have the skills. But if you're exclusively getting those parts, it means you're probably still in the learning phases. So to get to the top, there's really just experience. So you just get acknowledge someone based on their talent and their experience, but there is no head of department. For my particular department, we do have a head for sewing, and we do also have a head person for body shop and molding, where they direct everyone who does what task. I actually don't know exactly my title. I'm sometimes called a digital sculptor or special effects costumer, but my official title is a little unknown because some people say we're designers, and we kind of do have designing duties, but we're not exclusively designers. So that title goes to another person. So we have a mix of titles that we use interchangeably for my particular job and department. So that's not really helpful, but specialty costume. So I think that is determined between both the director and the official costume designer. I think they're the ones who end up making those calls, where sometimes it's just the feel, like, oh yeah, I want this to kind of feel more rustic, or maybe this is going to be more fantasy or more sci-fi or grunge. Like, they might have a feel, and then the costume designer might make that call based off of the script or whatever's happening, timeline in the story, and then they will give it to us. So we already have like a visual language to work with by the time we receive the artwork. So yeah, it's the people right before us that makes that call. But occasionally we are hired to be the costume designers, so we can make that call. So the people who receive the scripts, which is basically just a couple people at the shop, like my boss or the owner and like another couple really high up people, they'll receive the script and then they might determine some of that themselves. But most of the time, it's the other people. Yeah, so when we receive the artwork, some of it is not clear at all. And that's when, or it might be just one shot, one angle, one view. So you don't know what the rest of the costume is, and they don't provide any information. So that's when you get to decide, or me, someone in my department, we get to go there and we can say like, oh, well, I think this is what it should look like. So then we'll sculpt what we think it should look like. Sometimes my boss, he'll just draw out what he thinks it looks like, but usually there's a back and forth. Like, okay, I sculpt this, he'll look at it and he'll say, you know, I like it or don't. Or he might say, okay, just change this one spot here, so I'll make the adjustments, and we'll actually send it back to the costume designer, whoever it is that's above us, production. They'll look at it and they'll give the final approval, or they'll give us any feedback if they want anything changed. So yeah, my job is a lot of interpretation. So I see something and I get to interpret what does it actually look like in the end, and then someone will approve that design or not. So that's where my little artistic bend gets to enter into the picture. So it's always fun when you get a slightly vague idea or concept, because then you can throw in the details and all the extra features. Eras and all that don't really affect it much. What affects difficulty is more time than anything else. How much time do you have to work with can really affect how easy it is to get something done. But a big thing is, are there electrical components? Because if there's light, a lot of times you don't want it to be too thin, because you don't want to see hot spots from the lights that we use. So you want to have a certain level of depth, but you want to keep that form-fitting and nice to the actor who's wearing it. So a lot of those details are more of what's challenging, of how to get something where it works practically, but also visually looks really good. Another thing that might be in that same vein that can be a little problematic are, you know, the proportions of your actor. So some actors have a really big head and small shoulders, but you want to give them big shoulders and put a helmet on them, and the helmets always make your head look bigger. So you have to try to figure out ways to still keep that nice silhouette, those proportions, to look like a superhero or action star or something, without making them look like a bobblehead. Because that's the easiest way to sculpt, is to make everything kind of like bigger or thicker. Then you have a lot more room for any hardware that you might be using or electrical stuff, but then it kind of looks like a toy. And they look kind of childish, it looks a little cheap. But to make things look really nice, custom, and sleek, you have to make everything really thin and tight. So you have to make sure your work is very accurate, very detailed, but you're also working in very small spaces, especially working on smaller actors and individuals. Like, a lot of females can be a little hard, or kids, because everything is so much smaller. And then you also have print tolerances and thicknesses that machining, all that you have to work within too. So trying to keep the look, the heroic look, and make it realistic at the same time is a little bit of where a lot of the challenges lie, is that state. But stylistically, it's all pretty easy. The more older you get, the more we might actually throw in some traditional sculpting, because you might want it to look more handmade. If you're making like gladiator armor, we might also digitally sculpt it, but sometimes we might throw in some traditional sculpting to look like, well, they probably did it by hand. So you might get a mix of that. So we'll blend that kind of art style in with it. Or sometimes you get interesting materials thrown in. So you might have to accommodate that, find how to source all that stuff. But arrows don't really matter. Themes don't matter too much. It's more of those other factors, electrical, size, and proportions. There's also the challenge of sometimes your actor and stunt doubles are very different sizes, so you can't really reuse a lot of the same things. You might have to make a completely different thing for the stunt, because they might be 5 inches taller, or they might be all legs and the actor all torso, so you can't really reuse a lot of the same pieces. Normally they're cast pretty similar, so you can reuse some of it, but sometimes, like this is the stunt double that's meant for taking punches, or the martial artist, so they might have different body types, so you always have to accommodate that, or the asymmetry, which can be, you know, something that adds a little extra time or a few more extra steps to making something. It is helpful to have some training, to at least have some knowledge with industrial machines, which is more easily to achieve by taking classes. And there's some trade schools that do that, or some fashion schools that help you with that. But for my particular thing, you can take 3D modeling classes. There are some people who have done that with schools, art schools specifically, maybe for like character design, which you can bring some of that skill over to what I do. Or they might take classes for like industrial design, for product design, which is kind of more what I did. It's not exactly the same thing. I was able to borrow some stuff, but yeah, maybe if you are doing VFX, if you're doing CGI, you might have some 3D modeling skills you can bring over, but you really don't, for my particular department, have to go to school for it. A degree doesn't exactly matter. What matters is your portfolio and can you do it. So that's kind of why I went through a trial phase, because I didn't have much of a background in what I'm doing. I sculpted stuff, but I didn't have it printed. So that's another thing that a lot of people forget, is it's one thing to sculpt, it's another thing to have a sculpture be real and work well and fit on someone. Because people might come in, they're like, yeah, I sculpted a knee pad, but when you print it, it's like this thick, you can't bend it. So things like that, like knowledge in that is important. Knowledge in like, oh yeah, you need to be able to bend your wrist or need that mobility or stuff about that, that's also important, but that you can gain through experience, just trying on your own, just practicing a lot. But for stuff like sewing, yeah, probably is best to take classes to do. I know like a few of our sewers did take tailoring stuff, or they worked in high fashion before coming in. They're also for mold shop, you can learn on the job, but to be really good at it, you might want to be an apprentice to someone for a little bit to learn the nuances of how to do it well. I actually didn't go to school for what I'm doing. I learned almost everything online. And I took a class here or there to maybe like an intro class to help me get started with a program like ZBrush, but most of my training was on my own. And then through the job once I got in. I actually still look at like different programs. I've considered taking other classes, and at least the intro classes to other programs that might seem useful, because the technology changes. Even the programs I started with have changed a lot since I've started using them. There might be new tools or features that might actually make things faster and smoother. So I think it's good to keep studying. So yeah, I'll look into other programs and see, can I use that? There are some programs I do use I haven't mentioned, but I'll use it for maybe one or two things, but that's why it's good to keep searching, and that's why I do it. Okay, so that's kind of the beginning when I was doing a lot of praying, trying to figure out what to do with my life. So it's a funny story, really, because there was all these little things that, like little messages that came in of like, this is what you should do, signs from God of like, here you go, this is the field I put you in. But one of them was that my brother was at a thrift store and he bought a laptop case because he knew I had a laptop and he didn't. And when I opened the laptop case, there was the cast and crew list for a movie that was shot in Chicago. So I was like, that's interesting. Maybe this is what I should be doing. I just like was looking at this list of like, this is an interesting opportunity I have here. So I started cold calling people on that list. I just called them, sent them emails, and that got me going of like starting to do my own research of movies that I know really well. Because that movie wasn't superhero, wasn't sci-fi, fantasy, so it wasn't exactly what I'm doing now. But through that experience, I was able to find, I guess, like the confidence, the comfort to call other companies I didn't know. So it's like, hey, you worked on these films. Like I would go on IMDb and like, oh, you worked on all these films that I really like and I know really well. I've seen it many times. Can you tell me about this job? Can you tell me about what it's like here? And actually a lot of people were really nice and they would just talk to me even though they never met me. So, and then I would follow up. Like I would send an email, I would send another call, and at one point I even came and visit LA and toured all the shops just so they could have a face to the voice or the messages they were receiving. So, and I brought my portfolio and I asked them like, what do you see? What can I do? What can I improve on? So I did that the year before I graduated, got all this advice, still kept in contact, just asking little things, trying to get a better feel of what it's like to work in this industry. And then I worked on my portfolio. So after I graduated, spent a little more time, more focused on a portfolio, trying to create my own costume that it incorporates a lot of different jobs and tasks. So I can get familiar with different materials and different responsibilities. Because I didn't know if I was going to go into sculpting right away. Thought maybe I'd be a painter or something else. So I tried different things to try to get a feel of different stuff. But someone also recommended in those phone calls, learn a little bit of 3D modeling because it looks like that might be part of the future. So I started to learn, and that's the only program I had access to at the time was SolidWorks. So I started learning that on my own. But mainly I got my job through cold calling and showing my portfolio. I eventually made my own website and I had all like highlighted pieces of artwork and I would bring that tablet to interviews basically and I would show them the different things I've been working on. So, and then after doing that, I got a few callbacks. So that's kind of how I got my job. Yeah, so my job, I guess, liked me. So they just kept giving me more stuff. So I finished a project and they just handed me more artwork. They're like, okay, we're working on this now. So I just started it. And that's been the last several years was, here's the next one, here's the next one. There was a time in the beginning, the first year and a half I started here, where in between projects, my hours were reduced. So they didn't really cut me completely, but I wasn't working full time. And then with those moments, I would take advantage of that, and that's when I would learn like another program or try to learn something else, take a class or something to further my skills. So now, after those first year and a half, couple years, now I am continuously working. I move on from one project to the next, and there's close to no stopping. So not much breaks, but you know, so there are seasons to this industry where you'll have a lot of work and it will kind of slow down, and then a lot of work and it will slow down. But still, during even the slow moments, I'm still working on another project. And it could even be personal projects, like for my boss or someone else, or for like, so, you know, a client that might not be related to movies at all. We've worked on a few different products for some musicians or actors or some people who have an idea. So there's actually some product work that slips in between some of the movie stuff occasionally. We actually get a lot of work from the same designers. They like us and they know what we do. So if they're hired for a project, a lot of times they'll come to us to build their stuff. So we get a lot of repeat customers. So that's cool because you hear someone like, oh, so I was just pulled into this project. You're like, we might work on their project, and they always get cool stuff. So it's always fun to work with them, and they're nice. We know how to work with them. So it's always fun to get some repeats. Actually, I could technically work from home, but I don't. I work at the office. I think it's just better to work in the office because you have access to all the other people. And since the stuff I work on, ultimately everyone else will touch, I like to know what do they like or what do they prefer or their ideas for certain things that make their job easier. But also because a lot of people in my shop have years of experience more than I do. So they will know like, oh yeah, this is a good idea or not. So it's more of a team environment that way. The best shops work more as a team. Sometimes like when things are going fast, you know, communication might drop and then you'll notice it. So it's best, I think, to work where everyone else is working. So you can get that smooth communication. You could just walk over and say, hey, look at this. I have a question about this thing here. Will this work for you or do you want me to use something else here? And then you can have direct, immediate feedback. There are a few people that work from home and it's a little slower. You'll have to send a lot of pictures. Then there's drawings, they'll send it back and there's that delay which isn't really good for time-sensitive projects. So you could, but it's probably best to be there. Oh yeah, a lot of those skills are transferable. So that's why I even said I worked on some products because it still is 3D building and I 3D build for printing and for machining. So for even prototyping for products, I could still build something for that, for them to test out and see if they like it. And yeah, theater is good. Even for friends, their little costumes, you know, you could still do it. There's jewelry, things like that. It's all skills that could kind of shift around from, I don't know, industry to industry, I guess. My company mainly works just in films. We do some stuff for TV shows. TV shows have gotten more popular. Originally, when I first started, it was just like big blockbuster films. Then we started moving to TV shows as Netflix and stuff became more popular. So we've done TV shows. Occasionally, we'll do something for a commercial or for a music video, but it really depends on the budget and the time frame. A lot of advertisements and music videos kind of have like a shorter working time frame. So we don't get a lot of those projects, but sometimes we do. But we've also, as a company, worked on products that you could buy at the store. Approximately, so the salary can kind of range if you're doing it freelance on your own. So I have friends that they work still for movies, but they're like their own business and company, and they change their rate basically on turnaround time, speed, and all that stuff. But I mean, you probably could start out like $15 an hour, but there are some people I've heard that make $1,000 an hour. So it's kind of depends on your skill set, your portfolio, where you will land on that scale, and what do you do exactly in it. Because I think some people who do more, lean more into the design, and they're in that kind of role, they'll have probably a higher salary. So I would say that's probably the range. I don't know exactly what average is, but it's really based off of experience and what you've completed at this point. The most difficult project would be a project just done in a short amount of time. Because we have some projects where the actor was recasted and we had to completely remake the suit, you know, in a very short time. And that's when it gets difficult because you don't want to make mistakes, but you're also putting in a lot more hours. Since we're all freelance, we just kind of work the hours until it's done kind of thing. So that might mean some really long weeks. So I would say that's what makes it difficult. But the other things that make it difficult is just how small and tight everything has to be. So that adds a challenge. But it's mainly the deadlines are the biggest issue. Like you might have something or you're working on it, you think you have plenty of time, and they're like, oh yeah, we're gonna film a month earlier. You're like, that's not good. Because you also have to work with some things take a while. Like once you build it, you send it out. We'll print things in-house, but there's certain things like metal goods we'll have to outsource. So we'll have to send our files to them, they make it, it comes to us. So basically just working with the time schedule is the hardest part. Or working, sometimes personally, I find it hard when we work with a designer that I don't like their taste. Then that's, like if I don't like their design, it's hard for me personally because I think their decisions are bad. So I might be a little less motivated or I might be trying to like resist in some way, but I mean, in the end of the day, it's their call, but I might propose like a few other ideas, like, I think we should steer in this direction. And some of them are stubborn, some are not. So it's like the stubborn ones who wait too long, that might take days before they get back to you. Those are what make like other things that make the project difficult. Because some are very fast and they're like, oh yeah, that's good, or this and that, and they know what they want, and they're like, here are the stuff you need, here's the actor. But some just like, wait, and that's when it gets tough. So I think the best thing is just to start making stuff. Because even if you're a sewer, a mold maker, or someone like me, mostly what's important, what people are going to look at is your portfolio. So if you make things, they have something to at least assess your skill level. And from there, they can give you pointers of how to improve or things that they think you could work on, like, and or little critiques where it's like, you know, maybe you do this a little wrong and this is how you could do it better. Or maybe stylistically they could give you advice or a direction to head to. And you can take classes in those things. So I think a mix is nice, but I don't think you need to feel the pressure to go to school specifically for those things, since ultimately it's at the end of the day, it's like, what can you actually make? And it's really important to work well with others, because a lot of this stuff is team based, and taking critiques well is super crucial. And that's where some people struggle, when someone comes and looks at their work and they're like, redo it, change it, this person changed their mind, start from the beginning, or I don't like this at all, change these things. And if you get too emotionally attached, that can make it very hard. So like, learn how to take critiques well, learn how to just make things, like just start, even if it's just for like Comic-Con or Halloween, just start making something, because then it gives you something to work off of. It might even tell you how fast you work, which every time you practice, you usually get faster. So even if it's something small like that, cosplay or whatever, you can build the skills, get faster, learn things, pick more challenging things as you go along, and you might incorporate new skills. But don't be afraid to start at a shop and start low. There are some positions that are more beginner that they'll let you take, or maybe they'll let you do like one small thing instead of like a big thing, and just do that. But never work more than one job for free. That is something told to me. So for your first job, you might get paid very little, but if you're able to make good connections and learn from it, that's a good thing. That's a valuable thing. You can apply it to future projects, but don't do more than one job for free. And if someone gives you a test, go for it. There's been some people when I was going through and they're like, here's a block of clay, sculpt something, come back. And the people who actually went and sculpted something with that block of clay and came back, a lot of them proved themselves to be hard workers, which impressed the owners of the company. So yes, just do it. Just don't be afraid. Make a mistake, try things. You might find a good glue and you're like, hey, this glue works well for this project. So it could be simple things, but as long as you're learning and trying, you might learn techniques. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Most of us are very friendly and they will talk to you and help you out, just like people help me out. So yeah, don't be afraid to ask. But if you have something physically, it definitely makes things easier, because then people could point directly at something and say like, do this thing here or do that there. Yeah, don't be afraid of school, but you don't need it.